Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking edition of the Hold My Beer series on the Matt Brown Show. With me, as always, is Brent Spilkin, Rich Mulholland. Guys, welcome back.
Hey, Matt.
Hey,
Brent,
Matt,
you really got to get your mic sorted out. Fuck, dude. You got to get that mic sorted out. We discussed this. It's a professional show.
The weeks came around so quickly that I haven't had.
Where's your AirPods? Put your AirPods in. Rich, you and I will leave.
Right. Hello there, Brent.
Yes, hello there.
I like
now
you know what I love is that we were basically all chatting for like 2 or 3 minutes before we hit record. And I love everything I love about this show is that Matt did not say this off air. I was doing a gig yesterday with Fred from Heavy Chef, and we were doing it with Andrew from Yuppie Chef and Roxy, the kind of pro surfer, amazing pro South African pro surfer who's also owns incredible online businesses. And while Fred was at the upfront doing his welcome, he noticed that Roxy had turned around to Michael Moll and said, "Hey, I've got a stain on my shirt." And Michael Moll was like, "Okay, well, just wear mine." So he gave her his shirt. So she's changing at the back. Fred sees all of this going on. Nobody else can see it. And again, like the consummate professional, he says, and there's our speaker in the back of the room changing. And everybody turned on. It was, yes, it was the best opening. And obviously he waited until it was all appropriate, but it was just incredible. Like the non-professional would hide it in a way, in that kind of audience, just like Matt did now. Anyway.
All righty, cool, guys. Well, welcome back. So feedback on last episode, Brent. You were
Well, I want to start with something before we get there. Like, this is why are we doing this? Okay, so I get feedback going, are you trying to ride Matt's network into the States? Are you? And I'm just going, no. As far as I understood, Matt misses Richard and me. This is why we're doing this. And it was like, let's jump on a call and talk shit, and it's become this thing, right? And it literally wasn't meant to be called anything. It wasn't going to be recorded. And you, Matt, went, I'm going to brand this thing, Hold My Beer. It could be fun. And I'm like, I'm all game. But as far as I understand, there really isn't much genuine intention besides, for me personally, besides expressing thoughts, learning stuff, being challenged, challenging, and actually shits and giggles, right? Like the fact that we don't have a set structure or even a set frequency. Like, I can't do it because I'm doing the school run. Okay, we'll do it out in 2 weeks. Perfectly cool, as opposed to we've got to get out one a week. You know, this isn't, as far as I'm concerned, there's no real intention behind this. So I don't know whether you guys feel the same. I love it. It's like the highlight of my day. But just to anyone who's listening, I don't think this is intentional in terms of we have a long-term agenda here. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, certainly not from my side. I mean, I think the reason why I wanted to do this with some kind of cadence, like every 4 weeks, was only just to keep in touch. You know, I mean, you guys know me and we all know each other really well. And also, yeah, like, you know, I'm from South Africa. I'm living in the States. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's for me, it's all about connection. But what I didn't, and from that purely, that was my only intention, was just to talk shit and have a yarn, whatever. But what clearly is happening is that this particular series is hitting nerves of some people. That's basically what I'm hearing from you. Like every week, either it's really positive, or people having a go at us for speaking about BE or fucking pronouns and whatever. And so that for me is just fuel for the fire, right? Because if we're hitting nerves, it means that what we're talking about matters to people in some way.
Okay, and so I guess, so I think you're correct. And I think this is actually a good point on intent, right? And sometimes intent is overrated, because the intent was Matt reaches out and says, hey, let's chat, and we're going to do a catch up. And then he said, you know, as you said, hey, let's record it. But, and it was only, I think, at the end of the end of the call that we said, hey, this was really fun. Let's do it again, right? It was like a date, right? You go on a date, you have a good time, you go on a second date. What's changed for me, though, is one, I really enjoy it. Two, I think there's tremendous value. Again, I'm so inspired by Matt, right? Look what he's done and achieved on a podcast. And you know, I was chatting to John Sane the other day, and he said, dude, you're really missing a trick. not having a podcast. He says, like, you don't understand. I walk around places around the world and people walk up to me and say, hey, I listen to Expansive, which is incredible. And so I do think that this is a really great platform for us to, to go out there and to say things. And while I want it to be total casual, I think we should be intentional in terms of creating good, meaningful conversations that we get really, really excited about. But beyond that, it's not about get into the States or do this. It's about how can we produce really cool, interesting content that keeps us fired up. And that is my sole thing. While I want people to enjoy it, I never want to be creating content that, oh, what if they don't like it? My thing is, will you two enjoy it? And if you two enjoy it, then it's checked all my boxes. And so my job every week is to entertain my two friends. And I believe by extension, other things will happen. Very quickly, my favorite podcast for years was the Hamish and Andy show. And basically, Hamish and Andy, they would save all the cool shit they saw during the week, or like, when they did it once a week, to share with each other when they met. And that's what made it beautiful. It was like two friends chatting and everybody had a great time.
Yeah. The other thing, just to add, like, I do think that this platform is where I feel most safe. Like, I can say whatever the fuck I want to say here, and I really don't care about judgment. But here's the rub. If I do a thought leadership video about influence or whatever it is, sales and that, and I publish it on LinkedIn, I'm like fucking petrified. It's pretty weird, right? Like, how is there such a huge disparity between like being free on this show? I suppose it's got my name in it and whatever, and I've been doing this for a decade, so maybe that's part of it. But so when we release this episode, I don't care. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't care what people think. But when I release a thought leadership video and I publish it, you know what I'm saying, like on LinkedIn, then suddenly that whole dynamic changes. Now I'm like,
the channel is different, right?
Yeah.
It feels like we're sitting in a room talking shit with your mates. Like, if you had a couple of beers in hand, that would be perfectly cool. When you're scripting something that you're putting out that random people are like, that is the purpose, you're way more sort of constructive, you're way more deliberate, and you're way more hurt by criticism. Where this is like a natural flowing, like, I'm actually challenging myself by doing this, by going, I think this is right, this is wrong, and you guys might like spill you out of your mind. And then I'm like, oh, that was a stupid thing to have said. And that's okay, because I feel like this is a safe space. And the weird thing is that when we bring guests in, I think that safety blanket is going to be less there when we have a new person on. So I think that just by adding people into the mix, the dynamic changes, right? So I love this format. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. So is this
I will say that...
Sorry, Rich. Sorry, you go ahead, buddy. Finish. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'll just say that I think, like, I do think different mediums allow us to behave in different ways, and there's different levels of production that go into it. So people will forgive you for being less refined and polished and your message being more perfectly eloquent on a podcast than they will if you're doing it on a video, because the assumption is, if you're producing a thought leadership video on LinkedIn, that, well, don't waste my time on just riffing. I want to know that this is a produced bit of content. So there's that. With regards to what we say, I think that we need to be mindful. Like, I won't say anything here that I feel like I wouldn't be mindful saying publicly, because this is public. And I think,
Sure.
It's worth remembering that we live in a world in which at some point in the future, so in the world we live in right now, there is a Back to the Future machine, a troll hunter, a troll finder, where trolls can go in and say, find me anything. Keep tabs on Richard Mulholland and search for anything offensive he has said. It didn't have to be offensive when he said it. It only has to be offensive now. And at some point in the future, this sentence that I just said has been indexed and checked to see if it flags as future offensive. And in which case I can be
future cancel. Yeah, are you getting
exactly.
canceled in future? Right?
And we're one AI person away from just basically keeping like a Google alerts on past person offense that they've created. So you can get a red card for something that you did a long time ago. And so while I think I'm hoping the future will be better at punishing people for things they said in the past. I think that we still have to be mindful of what we say. But I am, and I still say most of what I want to say.
Yeah. Well,
Can I just say that the fact that you were popping gummies with your wife and your teenage kid, that's going to come back and bite you in many, many years. That's what I want to say.
My son is 20, so he's not a teenager. He's 20 years old. He's like an adult. So it's not as like, I don't think
in the future, 21 will be the legal limit. And now you've fed your kid underage drugs. That's what's going to happen.
I would guess in the future, 16 will be the legal limit before it goes to 21. Right. Yeah,
exactly. Well, isn't that what happened with Kevin Hart when he got cancelled with the Oscars for hosting the Oscars? Because he said those homophobic jokes or whatever. Anyway, cancel culture went through his timeline from like 3 years earlier when he was a
timeline trolling.
And he was just being funny, and it was taken out of context, and then whole cancel culture went crazy on it, and he eventually got cancelled from the Oscars.
Can I just turn around and say categorically, if you are a human being, and I'm not speaking to you boys now, I'm speaking to you, if you are the type of human being that would go through somebody's timeline and to find something they may have said at any point in history that offends you, fuck you. Like, fuck you. In fact, you're so reprehensible to me that fuck you, stop watching right now. Like, I don't even want you to watch. That is such a despicable characteristic. Question yourself. Hey, like, what a horrible thing.
Well, if you're an individual, like, what kind of life are you leading that you want to be doing it? I understand that if it's two political parties looking to lobby and find dirt, I understand the practical value of doing that. But a person going, I'm going to scroll back through your timeline and look for the joke you made around, Crocs 15 years ago, and now they're cool, and I'm going to cancel you. Who are you? What? Get a laugh,
guys. Business idea. Okay, the thing that I just mentioned, but the other way. So let's call it history guide.
Positive.
And what it does is it does it the other way. So it goes back and looks for anything you said in any of your social feeds that is now deemed that could now bite you, and brings it up to speed. So it constantly alerts you that, hey, this is now in 2025, what you said back in 2018 is now deemed offensive. Would you like us to cleanse that from your timeline, Twitter, Facebook, things like that, before you get caught?
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Okay.
Anyway,
I mean, here we are.
Good.
I think just to maybe add a different angle to this, it raises a question for me. And that question is, like, how much should you care about what you put into the digital space, like social media and all that kind of stuff? Because the world does change. And so what you think today might be completely, faux pas in 3 years' time. But you can't see the future. So how much should you care about what you say? And I was chatting to Jordan Zimmerman. So his company does $4 billion.
The other Jordan man.
Jordan.
Yeah, another guy. Anyway, and he's got like 2 million followers on Instagram. Guy's like a proper alpha male and just like built a fucking huge business, and he's just like, fuck you. And even he's got fuck you money, basically.
Yeah, post-economic.
Yeah, he's a big boy, like in every sense of the word. And he said to me, like, you have to look. He actually said, if you're on Twitter, you have to, and before you write your tweet, but before you send it, read it and think about what you're actually saying and how it will be interpreted by the people that follow you.
Yes, but also fuck that.
But this is what I'm saying. It's the question, right? Like, you got a guy who, by all accounts, shouldn't give a fuck what other people think. And then you got everybody else, right? And so he cares because he says, well, you're building a personal brand. Like, what you say matters. Like, let's just say you said something really racist on the show. In fact, there was a guy who shall remain nameless, but we were in the in the office, and I was doing my show in the office with my whole team there, and there's black, Africans, white people, all that stuff. And this guy
back in South Africa still.
Back in South Africa, yeah, like this was probably like 7 years ago, and he used the K word on the show, and everyone was like, "What the fuck? You can't say that."
Was it Mark Oppenheimer?
No, it wasn't. But I don't want to mention.
I'm going to hang that up because I'd like to come back to it.
Okay? Yeah. So that's what I mean. So I wouldn't allow that.
I tell you.
Yeah, I was just to finish, but I wouldn't allow that to be out. You know what I mean? Like, you can say what you want. It's freedom of speech, but you can't say that. You cannot say that. So we removed it. So I'm interested to get your guys' views. Like, how much should you actually care? Because for me, I'm kind of on the side of, well, you can't care, because once it's out there, and you should always speak your mind. If you have a point of view, you have to share the point of view. That's what being human is, right? And if people don't like that point of view, then it's all about dialogue and encouraging conversation. Where it goes south, though, is where people start trolling. They're going through your timeline, looking for things that you said like 3 years ago, because it's now FUPA. So for me personally, I don't care as much as, say, a Jordan Zimmerman might care. But I think there are levels to that stuff in terms of how much should you care about what you say.
So where our care is as follows: will my kids hold it against me in the future? And it's my kids, possibly like my wife, a few friends that I care about their opinion genuinely, because I love them and they love me. And outside of that circle, I don't care about the rest. Now, the one thing I want to talk about the Zimmerman guy, and I don't know anything about him, but you also got to bear in mind is that it's kind of the Elon Musk thing. If you say something stupid, does it affect your share price? And if it does have a direct impact, then obviously you've got to be careful with what you're saying out there. So different people have different impact with what they say and how they say it. I say something semi-racist, and I might get someone come out the woodwork who I don't know attack me, but so what, right? I'm not saying I would, but I'm saying so what. But if I had a company and I said something racist, and my company and all my shareholders and all my staff trusts and everything lost millions of dollars, I'd be more cautious about what I said. Not like Elon Musk, weirdly enough, but definitely. So I think you got to realize your position, the impact of your speech, and for me, who do you care would judge you, and that's the people that are close to me.
I wrote a manifesto. In fact, Brent, I think I shared it with you, that I wanted to write one day, and it was pretty offensive. And it was basically, here's every offensive idea that I have about the world, and this is all my beliefs about things, and I'm going to put them all out there. And if you don't like them, then now you know everything. Everything bad that I believe is still on my values. There's nothing is reprehensible. It's just reprehensible to you. This is what it is. And in the end, we didn't do it. And part of it was because if, for example, somebody did decide to cancel me, I could lean into whichever political side would be happy with that and build an audience there. But my staff would be out of their work. And I actually, as a leader of a business, must be mindful of what can affect the people that I'm responsible for while they work for me. And so that was the thing. Just two other things though as well. By the way, I wanted to make sure that people understand, people watching, that if anybody finds something that we say in the present reprehensible and wants to challenge us on that, that's completely in play. It's not like I think that people shouldn't be allowed to challenge us. I'm saying if you go back into the future and find something that at the time of being said was okay, and then attack them on it in the future. Again, you guys know that I'm a vegan. At some point in the future, everybody who ate meat is going to, in today's day and age, is going to look like a shit. But it's completely unfair to attack them for it in the future when that happens, because this is the world we live in. And so we need to be mindful of that. Then on the K-bomb thing, the reason I mentioned Mark Oppenheimer is Mark Oppenheimer was the guy who did the case about the individuals who used the K word. And he was on Gareth Cliff talking about the case. And when he was using the word on Gareth Cliff, on essentially national, broadcast, he used the K word. And the reason he used it, and Gareth Cliff asked him about this, and he said, well, hold on a second. You need to understand when you're in court, you can't say they said the K word, because are you saying they said literally the K word, or are you saying they said the word that represents? He said, when it comes to legal issues, being clear matters. If I am telling you that this is what somebody said in respect to a case that I'm talking about, he said, I owe it to you to actually spell out to say the right word, because I'm not saying it offensively. I'm saying it as per reporting, right? So there is context, which is interesting. Now, even knowing that and even explaining that, it is literal. I could not bring myself to say the word, even though I understand why he did. As a lawyer or an advocate, I can't bring myself, even trying to describe this to you guys, to say it. It's such a weird thing, right? You have to hold yourself accountable to your values and norms.
But also, if we said it on this show, someone could clip that piece out, put it in the wrong context, have a following, and you're dead. Completely
If
out
you
of
do
context.
that to Mark Oppenheimer, you can. It's there. It's on the show.
Yeah.
But this is
So
what happened
it's too risky, right?
This is what happened to Joe Rogan when he was using the N-word on, like, you know, episode 152. And he's like done almost 2,000 now. And so some prick did the same thing, went through all of his shows, and they pulled out every time he said the N-word, and they took it out of context, but they stitched it all together, and it was like a minute long. And he was just saying things that out of context made him look like a racist. And then they obviously published that on Instagram and Twitter and shit, and it went viral, and he had to apologize to, like, the world about what he had said all those years ago, but then also said, listen, this makes me look like this, but actually this is what I actually believe, and whoever's done this, you know, has taken what I've said out of context.
You're a bad person.
Or it was what he, you know, it was just not the right thing to say. And so looking back at what he said, he now knows that today he would never say those same things. Do you see what I mean? And this is what happens now. And so it's happening to Joe Rogan. So it's celebrities, right?
Now, that word, I think, was always up and questionable. I don't think since Joe Rogan, that was a risk. Like, I would never say that. And I would never have written it. And I would say the N-word, and I would have said that 10, 15 years ago. And not because I would have got caught out, just because I think, like, yeah, this is not a hill I'm willing to die on, because I think it is a really shitty word with a really shitty history, right? So this isn't because I don't want to be canceled. This is because it goes against my values. I do think, though, there are certain words that we're using now so here's one. I'm listening to a podcast. I listened to a podcast called Talk Jitsu, and he uses the term. So he said, like, if you do this thing in one of the early episodes, like episode 2 or 3, and there's only been like 25, and he said, if you do this thing, you're a bit of a retard. And then British people came on and said, bro, you can't say that. And so now he says, he calls it the R word, which is kind of funny, but it's like, so in his mind, and for me, that word's kind of meant the same thing forever. In his mind, oh, that was just something you said when people were acting stupid. He'd never joined the dots to those two things. So he was using a word like a year ago that in his mind was okay, that if they went, like, now he's found out that it's not. And so what I'm saying is there could be words that in our lexicon right now are in play, and at some point in the future, a word that we're using over and over again may be out of play. And a great thing on this is, or a great example of this is, whatever your current word for race is, because people keep changing the game on what's okay. I was in Canada, and something came up about my son's girlfriend, and we were talking about race, and I said, oh, my son's girlfriend is colored. And they said, Richard, you can't say that. I was like, how dare you say I can't say that? And he said, you can't use the word colored. I said, well, go and tell the millions of people that call themselves colored in our country, because it's an actual race. It's not black, it's not white, it's colored. And they're, whoa. You know, and but like they may change their name in future to say, we don't like colored, we prefer, you know, whatever. And now we use the word colored, and now this is now offensive because I talk about colored folk. Yeah.
But I want to give just two examples. The first thing is Louis C.K., the comedian, does a clip on being retarded and his history of someone being retarded. And he says, he goes, like, in the day, we'd bring someone who had disability and go, this guy right here, he's retarded. And this guy would nod his head. He said, like, it was completely okay to talk about those people as retards. And at some point, someone or the collective went, no, not okay. And it's interesting because when did that take place? By region, by culture? It just took place at a certain point in time. But the next story I want to have for you, which is amazing, is my father used to own a sweet factory millions of years ago. And
wait, hold on a second. Are you changing context? Because I want. Okay, can we still come back to the word dwarf?
No,
okay,
same
cool.
thing. Okay, no. Okay, dwarf, great. But in South Africa, we used to get these little black balls, sweets. They were like
yeah,
chewy,
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, and on the packaging it was N balls. Okay, and as a kid, that's what we called them. I grew up calling them the N-word balls. Completely acceptable on retail shelf. Now, I'm not saying acceptable by everyone's standard. Just bear in mind, we're talking about during apartheid. There's no question around it. But those things become so deeply ingrained in individuals and acceptable and spoken about that it becomes quite difficult that today, when I see those sweets on shelf, in my mind, that's the word I use. Because that's the way I've been taught that's what it is. I won't say it to public. I certainly won't tell my family, friends, or daughter that's what it is. But it's so deeply ingrained. Does that make me racist or wrong or poorly educated? Like, I often question on the fact that there are certain words that I associate with certain things, which are absolutely wrong. But when I was 7 years old in the peak of apartheid, is it my fault that that's the way I was educated? So like, there's these other things where I'm trying to come around to, and you put them in a little box somewhere and just ignore them, right? But occasionally I think about these things and go like, it's a real challenge to not be racist, but to not say the wrong word. And I often worry that I go out and have a couple of gummies with Rich and his not teenage son, and I talk about the wrong thing because that's the way I'm ingrained. And it doesn't mean I'm racist, it's the way I'm trained. And like, those things concern me, weirdly enough. Like, not every day, but I think about it.
So I got another example. So Tropic Thunder. Robert Downey Jr. plays a black man, blackface, right?
Yeah.
And then he also, in that scene, he says, "Never go full retard." Remember? So that,
he's got a double whammy there.
Yeah. So that's
the
so
first
like
cancel, the second cancel. Yeah,
exactly. So I mean,
two negatives is a positive.
But this is in like a film. You know what I mean? Like a Hollywood produced film.
PG rated.
But he picked up shit for that. He picked up lots of shit for that.
Yeah,
future shit though.
That it was 2008. So in 2008,
it's a minute ago.
Yeah, it's like a minute ago. So 2008, it was fine, right? Otherwise, how did it get through scripting and even the actors going, yeah, that's funny.
so let me say, sorry,
no,
but I thought
I'm done.
Okay. So I do think, Brent, in your story, obviously you're not bad for saying that, right? We all said it. The weird thing is, it's kind of like if I say to you, Smashing Pumpkins, right? You think about the band, right? You think about what it is. What you're not actually thinking of is somebody smashing a pumpkin. You hear things and they become, we don't break down words into their parts. So it wasn't like, it was only way later. And I had a debate with a family member who said to me, this is so stupid and so woke that we shouldn't call those sweets that. I said, hold on a second. This is not woke. We absolutely should not call them. They're literally referring to black people's testicles. Like, for fuck's sakes, this is a horrifically horrible thing to say to a group of people.
Sure.
It's one thing that you said it when you were young and it was programmed. I do think now we should be better at looking for things and saying, wait a minute, like on the premise of like, do no harm. Like, fuck's sakes, that's so obvious. Like, you know, the other one in South Africa, when we arrived here, that was totally normalized, was those, if you made a potjiekos, a potjie, which is like a South African stew, you would make it in a big black pot. And that pot, because it was black, was called a K-word pot. I am so unbelievably embarrassed that people refer to it as that. Like, that was the term. You go to like the hardware store and ask for that.
I've never heard that. I've never heard
that either. Yeah, I haven't heard that either.
Yeah, then I got to speak to the people that my parents introduced us to. And it was, you know, it was I guess a subset of people. This is
white hats and swastikas. What were they wearing?
No. And maybe they were, like technically more racist, but it was certainly a normalized term. Like, that's what people refer to it as, and things like this. But like, here's a crazy thing. Like, I would imagine people would turn around to their housekeeper and say, could you get me this? And it was so disconnected from reality. But now, here's the point, is that the difference was, imagine now they lived in an Instagram world in which that world was there. And imagine in that Instagram world, they were doing a influencer cooking video and they were talking about how to make a potjiekos. And somebody was on there and using this term, which, I mean, I can't understand how we didn't think it was reprehensible. I just can't understand. But, you know, there it goes. It's like, if we want to cancel everybody cancel your parents. Right? If you're thinking about canceling anybody, cancel your parents and and definitely cancel your grandparents.
Your teachers,
yeah, all your teachers, your grandparents, they all did offensive shit, right? They were all horrific, except that they weren't. They lived in it's tricky.
Weird time.
Dwarfs is an interesting one because I watched the video the other day, and it was somebody challenging, the new Snow White movie, to be more politically correct. They turned the dwarfs into not dwarfs and more diverse. And this dwarf is turning around, and I saw him on, I think it was like Piers Morgan or something. It was some clip that came up on YouTube, but he was like, hold on a second, fuck you. This is cultural appropriation. Well, how is it okay? And the guy was like, well, it could be offensive. Are you saying I am offensive? And this was the the woke person was saying, no, but it should be more representative. Okay, so of all the roles in the world you could take from an actor, there's a very few jobs that I can actually star in a movie in, and you're now taking this one to give to, a Mexican and a thingy, and because the 7 dwarfs are all like, it's a woman, and it's basically 7 like weirdos. Have you seen it?
Mm-mm.
No, but is it called Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs? Is it still the same name?
Right, and Snow White is now a Mexican lady because they said it is offensive. I think we might have mentioned this in episode 1. I can't remember, but basically, if not, they actually went back and the actress turned around and said, because it's time to bring this up to speed. But this was literally the story of a German princess who was named Snow White because her mom pricked her blood and it fell in the snow, and it was like she was as white as the snow or something like this. Like, that is literally her name. And they were like, it's inappropriate. Well, it's not inappropriate because you can't wipe out an entire generation of history. Like, there's definitely things that we should bring up to speed, and we should be creating new, amazing stories that are more inclusive in every way. But you've also got to understand that, going back to tell German people that they're a fairy princess cannot be a fairy princess and cannot be who she is. That is just cultural appropriation. There's no, we either believe in cultural appropriation is a value-based concept, or we don't.
So what they've done is, in this remake, they're now just calling it Snow White. And dropped,
really?
Yeah. So it's actually, I'm just
And
reading an article about it. So basically,
and Snow White isn't Snow White.
Yeah. So the son of original film directors accuses Disney studio bosses of insulting the 1937 classic and destroying his father's creation. My dad and Walt Disney would be turning in their graves over a woke Snow White remake. So that's another example.
But can I have a conversation here, right? So if we're allowed to break up Disney or any of these things, all right? I want to challenge the Bible. Right? Here is this God that wipes out the first generation, throws plagues, does absolutely horrendous things to huge amounts of people, but no one's canceling the Bible, right? Like, I'm going, which stories and which religions and what cultural norms are we allowed to attack and not attack? And where does this line stop? Now, I understand that I'm not trying to say that religion is wrong. I'm not a religious or a person.
Matt and I are.
Okay, I've seen the big cross on your back that you bear, right? But what I'm trying to understand is that, like, how far back do you want to go? Because if we're talking about appropriation and things that have done bad things, oh my God, the Bible has to be, ground zero for completely shitty things that have happened from a story perspective that need to be relooked at. So, like, for me, we're picking our battles incorrectly.
Well,
no, because I think that is being attacked. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah. So let's cancel the King of England and the monarchy of England for what they did, in terms of the slave trade. So, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but then we have to cancel the people of Nigeria who are still enslaving people in indentured servitude. So, sure, this becomes difficult.
Yeah, I think if your intention is to find things, like, you can literally, it's like a statistic. There's a statistic for everything. So if you have a hypothesis or an idea that you want to peddle and you're looking for a data point, you can make one up or find one. So to substantiate your point of view,
Well, I think this comes down to, early enough, before we jumped on the call, the one of the words, and I'm not sure it was Richard's point to talk about, I think was, and I've lost context with you, but this intention, being intentional. I think the reality is that all we can actually do is be intentional in the way we act, us, the individual, right? There's nothing more you can do to try and change the world or change these things, unless you really, like, make it your cause and die on that hill, as Richard said. But I actually think that we need to be more intentional with everything we do. And as long as it's not causing harm, I think those intents are probably quite sound. So, like, I think, and I'm not sure what your intention what the point of that being intent was related to. But I think that ultimately this always comes down to, well, you do good, be the change you want to see in the world, like that kind of thinking. And ultimately getting upset about what everyone else is doing is what you're wasting your time. You make the change, you become that person. And I sound like a bit Gandhi-ish here, but I actually think that's what this comes down to, is what do you control? Your narrative, your actions.
So in NA and AA, in step, I can't remember what step it is. It's like step 8 or something, or step 4 even. So step was fearless moral imagery, and then there's another one. Anyway, but basically once you've done that, you then have to make amends. And one of the things it literally says, a principle in NAAA, is you only make amends to those people that you've obviously hurt as a consequence of your abuse of substances. But you don't make amends to those people where it will harm them. And I think so it's like, except where you will do harm. If you go to your wife, say, listen, now I'm clean for a year, by the way, I fucked 10 other girls. That's not a way to make amends to your wife, you understand? Because it will harm them. And to your point, Brent, what I think is a great principle is, and I agree with you, by the way, I think you should be more intentional. You have to be, especially today. But I do think that as long as your intention is not to cause harm, then you should be free to say what you want to say. And the world should not take what you said, Joe Rogan, from 7 years ago, or Matt Brown or Richard or like whoever it is, and then bring that forward into a different context to cause you harm. So their intention is to actually cause you harm. Whereas what you were saying, it wasn't intentionally your fault, or you weren't trying to harm anyone as a consequence of what you said, you see. So I think as long as your intention is pure and you have a point of view on something, like we were talking about pronouns and binary and non-binary. I mean, like, I don't understand it. It's what I said the last time. But then, Brent, you got that message from that guy, right? Basically saying, pronoun this. And then he was like, do you understand what I mean? So we weren't trying to harm anyone. We were just having a conversation about it. But
that's the thing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. My other concern here is in order for us to enrich ourselves and learn, we have to actually ask these questions. And my concern is that if I don't know what it is, who do I ask? I ask people that I can trust in a safe environment. I don't go to Twitter and go, hey, what is it he, she, her, because I'm just going to get spam full of rubbish and opinion. I want to have the conversation. So if we're having this conversation around, I don't understand what it is, why would they do this? And ask those questions, and then still get attacked for not knowing the answer, I think that's also unfair. And that's kind of the commentary I've got from one or two people, privately, people that I know were like, you're asking the wrong people. I shouldn't be asking the two of you. And I was like, well, who else do I ask? Where do I go to find out the right answer or get a sense of what the average looks like out there?
I also think that this is a very, this idea of saying that you should only ask people that are harmed by something. Just because you've decided, there's a difference between deciding that you are harmed by something and actually being harmed by something. So if you decide that it's an act of aggression, that I run my hand through my hair because it's offensive to bald people, right? Or something like this. And you decide that this gesture, when you talk about pulling your hair out, that's a very offensive statement to people who are follically challenged, right? And so we mustn't say that. Yeah. No, fuck you. You don't get a vote on that. Like, just because you've chosen to be a fan. So in my keynotes, I always turn around and say, I usually get through the beginning and then I make a joke. And at some point I say the word shit, and I do it quite early. And then I turn around and say, hey, look around the audience. Did anybody die? And then they kind of giggle. And I said, like I just said shit. Did anybody die? Just in case. I said, look, that's about as bad as it gets. And you may be offended, but it's okay. If you feel offense at any point in this presentation, please know that offense is taken by you because none is given by me. And I think that's a perfect fair statement. And some people have said to me, no, but you can't say that. And I'm saying, well, I can. Because to me, the most important thing is to judge intent. And this is what we've lost. Right? We are not even, I know you're talking about the intent from how I communicate, and I take that on. And so if I've said something, I've run it through my list of values and said, is this cheeky? Yes. Will some people be shaken by it? Yes. Am I doing that for a reason? Yes. Is it offensive? No. Okay. My intent is to do X. And I think the first thing that we should always do before we criticize anyone on anything is to judge their intent. And if you turn around and say, yeah, they're trying to just be contrarian assholes, well, then call us out and tell us that we should maybe go and speak to other people. But beyond that, I think if the first question that we should put back to anybody who challenges us in anything is, hey, what do you think our intent was when we said that? And if they can find a way to make that point offensive, then they've got a leg to stand on. But you said you had feedback on something.
Myself.
Yeah. Matt mentioned you had feedback.
Okay. So I'm going to read this WhatsApp that I got from someone that I think we both know, who shall remain unnamed for this episode, right?
Can I try
So
guess?
he writes to me. No.
Okay.
So he writes to me. This is the WhatsApp I'm going to read it to you, and this is the first part of probably the first third of it. I'll read to you. So Spilly, as one of the smartest people I know, if you don't understand pronouns, you need to go out and seek those opinions and voices which promote a different viewpoint to your own. Now, how do I know? Before I'll move on, right? But how do I know who is going to have a different viewpoint to my own unless I ask people, right? Part one.
Wait,
Number two,
pause on part one.
Yes.
Pause on part one. I'm not sure who this is, but if they think that I have not, or you have not, or Matt has not heard every argument. And by the way, there is a person on our public speaking program who uses they, them pronouns. And I said to them, I don't understand. I feel like this is an inconvenience that I do not understand why we're going through this, and did have that chat. But more importantly, even before that, I have heard all their arguments. It's not like I don't hear the argument. It's that I may not agree with it, which is still in play. Matt, anything on part one?
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, like I said to you guys, I was off social media for a year, right? So I'm not exposed to it. I hear it. I hear people saying that they are frustrated with it. Why I don't understand it. Like people are just confused by it. Again, like I don't know anyone that's affected by it. I don't have any friends or parents in my network or kids who feel that they should be they, them, I see it on LinkedIn, like when you go in, it goes pronouns he, him, right? And that's basically the extent to which I understand it. Then I hear things like, we spoke about this on the first episode, right? Transgender, like what does that mean? So if you see yourself as basically, that is the skit by Dave Chappelle, and he says, imagine LeBron James goes into the women's NBA league because he sees himself as a woman and he scores 4,000 points per game. You know what I mean? Like what he says, it's ridiculous. Like it cannot be. It's not like it's just people don't understand it. And so I'm not exposed to it and I don't understand. So.
Okay.
Good point. Let's come back to that later. Just I want to hang up transgender sports later on because I have a point of view that I want to run past you, and let's go point two. Unless you want to comment on point one, Brent.
No. So my point is that like he just says that you need to go out and seek opinions and voices which promote a different viewpoint to your own. And I'm like, well, how do I do that? Actually asking people that I know and trust, and who are these people? Anyway, so I was a little bit, and then he said, asking Matt Brown and Richard Mulholland, and the term people use for them is cishet. I think that's correct. About
no, fuck you. You don't get to. Nobody gets to call me cishet. Okay, if I'm going to acknowledge other people's genders, I will not allow. I do not stand by this. Do not call me cisgendered. That is not a term I identify with, and that is not an approved term. I've never met a cis person. 90% of cis people aren't happy to be referred to as cis people.
Sorry, and I don't understand. What is cis? What?
Cis means born male, identifies male. I think that's what it means, basically.
Cis heterosexual. You are born a heterosexual male, a cis het male. So I must now use other things to describe my what I was born
myself.
as. Like I don't feel like I've gone on Twitter and said this as well. Like I'm not comfortable with you. I don't like you using that term for me, and I will respect yours, but I want you to respect that you can't say that to me as well.
Anyway, so he goes on to say that asking Matt and Rich isn't the way forward. Don't get me wrong. I love Rich. He's a personal friend I highly value. He wants to talk about the fact that he thinks Richard is coming around, to the right viewpoint, which is individually we treat people with love and respect. When we meet trans people, we give them what they deserve. Now, he's not wrong there in terms of treating people with love and respect. But his thing is you're coming around to the right viewpoint. And again, who is he or anyone to say this is the right viewpoint. And I agree. If the wrong viewpoint is intentionally cause harm, I'm agree that is the wrong viewpoint. But
well, I think that's where he is right. Is that if you meet somebody and you want to meet them with the love and intent, but it doesn't have to be agreement. Again, to the point of the person out of respect, and because I do genuinely really like them, and again, I'm observing their pronouns that I struggle with, that I told them I struggled with here. Like, I think I struggle. I feel it's a selfish pronoun and it's a confusing pronoun. If they preferred he or she, it would be super easy for me, and I would understand because we're not changing the premise of language. But they makes me also, I feel uncomfortable because I'm not really comfortable with binary fluid as a term. So it is kind of tricky. But I, out of respect and love, literally on a call when they were interviewing for a program they were going to pay us for, I told them, listen, I need you to understand where I sit on this thing. And on the beginning, when they joined the program, I brought it up with everybody on the call, and they turned around and said, hey, I'm not the pronoun police. If you fuck this up, I totally understand. Like, we're all just trying to do the best we can. I'm going to always assume that nobody has ill intent. And everyone was like, thanks so much. And as such, everybody makes a massive effort to treat this person respectfully. But that's also not a collective noun, because I do think there are a lot of chance takers and people just trying to be shits.
Anyway, I'm not going to read the rest of the message, because you then commented on a post where I referred to a case study that Jordan Peterson referred to.
No, go for it. You got to do it now.
Okay,
I'll die.
No, hang on. Okay, so in a talk, Jordan Peterson refers to a famous scientific case study where they're measuring motivation. They put a rat in a tube and they tie a string that measures pressure to the rat's tail. They put cheese in the front of the tube and they check from a motivation how hard the rat pulls towards the cheese, right? They then put the cheese in the front and the scent of a cat behind it. And guess what? The rat pulls harder, okay? Then they remove the cheese and only have the cat scent behind it. So they can measure negative versus positive motivators, right? Jordan Peterson talked about this, and I thought the test was fascinating. So in a LinkedIn post, I was talking about motivation in the business sense, and I wrote there, and Jordan Peterson, love him or hate him, don't judge me for it, we spoke about this thing, and I went into the motivation piece. He picked up on the Jordan Peterson piece and then said to me, I want you to comment on your LinkedIn post about Jordan Peterson. He's a guy who is fearful of something which he's exacerbating. When people weaponize something, we need to understand why they're doing it. We need to look at the original definition of woke, for example, being awake to be recognizing the injustices of the past. And I'm just going, he's giving me this thing about Jordan Peterson and woke, where there was zero mention about Jordan Peterson's opinions. He just told me about this case study, which I then went to speak about. And maybe I'm just being frustrated and like, sensitive here. But it's this thing where people are voicing their opinion around our conversation and taking it to the next level because we spoke about Jordan Peterson potentially. But I think that people then go, just because I mentioned Jordan Peterson, therefore I promote him or support his thoughts, and it has nothing to do with that. I actually heard someone else talk about Jordan Peterson's thing. I went to Google it, saw Jordan Peterson's quote, and then went to find the study. Like, I'm frustrated with the fact, and maybe this is my own problem here, with the fact that people are so quick to judge, corner you, box you, and like, maybe the word is judge here, that I'm being judged something that I haven't actually said it. We are, but what I'm saying is I'm frustrated with the fact that people can come out the woodwork, and maybe this is the nature of what we're doing here, and again, out of context or misappropriate things that I've said, and merge me talking about pronouns with a LinkedIn post and making it one argument. I don't know. It just caught me out of it. But my response, just out of interest, was just FYI, and this is why I started this podcast with, we're doing this because we're actually having fun here. We're having a conversation, we're debating stuff, we're not picking sides necessarily, and for me, it's partly educational. And that was my response. I'm like, I'm not even going to necessarily argue here, because you've missed the point of this podcast in my life. I think that was my response.
Huh.
Anyway.
Well, nice to know I'm cis het.
Matt's still like, what? So here's the thing. I think it's quite cool that, so first of all, like Jordan Peterson is polarizing. We're all aware of that. I think you should be, but again, some people love him, some people hate him. I'm actually more nuanced. I believe in, again, Jordan Peterson, like I'm a vegan and Jordan Peterson eats a carnivore only diet. Like there is 100 things Jordan Peterson and I disagree on, and there's some things Jordan Peterson and I agree upon. I think Jordan Peterson is a terrible speaker, but I think he's an incredible interviewee. And he's a great debater. And I think that there's certain things, you can simultaneously hold views about a person. The other thing is I've never met Jordan Peterson, so it's very hard for me to gauge his character from his public persona, because he is got a public persona that pays his bills and does things. And the reason that public persona that pays his bills is so important is because of a standing up against legally being forced to use a pronoun, which I'm dead against legally being forced to do anything of that sort. He's lost a lot of his academic positions. And again, I probably lean to liking him less than most people, I would think. So I'm certainly not in defense of. But one should be allowed to talk about them. But on the flip side, this person who messaged you, I mean, they messaged you privately. They spoke about their things, their view on it. It's kind of in play, right? It's like we're having a candid conversation, and this feels a bit to me like an extension of it. Like if they were on the show or if they were chatting to us, like I wouldn't feel that any of those questions or challenges would be out of play by any of us. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like I would take it.
Yeah.
If it was in conversation, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Again. Yeah, exactly. Should we change gears?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
An hour on the shit.
Wow, we did good.
Yeah, we did real good. It's amazing. So where do you
Okay,
boys
so
want
do
to
you
go
want
from
me
here?
to do you want me to go into the idea trap?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So I want to chat to you guys about this idea of, and in fact, this is actually quite good because it does segue quite nicely into it. So Nick Haralambis, our good friend, sent us a podcast recently, and the podcast is called If Books Could Kill. Have you guys heard of it?
No.
I have not.
Okay, so here's the basic premise. The premise is that they built an entire podcast just to take a shit on self-help style books. So Subtle Arts or Start With Why or like Atomic Habits or whatever, those kind of books. And they basically just tear them to shreds. Now, and again, the thing is, if books could kill. So I started listening to it, and Nick sends it to me and says, hey, here's some interesting perspective. And he really, really enjoyed it. And we spoke about it afterwards, and, fair play, preference and all that. And have you ever gone into something where it starts off and it's like basically shitting on something and it's really entertaining? So they take on Atomic Habits and they start taking a dump on it, and they're really like quite funny and quite snarky and things like this. And for the first 5 minutes, it was really amusing. And then you think, and by the way, the one person never read it. So the one person read it and the other person's just feeding off what the one person said. And then you start thinking like, and the one person who read it does try and give some degree of this is what's nice, but then they just shit on it again. And anyway, the long and short of it is I realized then, wow, negativity as a trait is really unattractive. Because by the end of it, the only thing I didn't like, I felt sorry for the author of the book. And I really disliked the 2 podcast hosts. I thought, you're literally just trying to be horrible people shitting on somebody else's work. Like that's your sole objective. You started a podcast just to be mean about somebody else's work. And yes, you're punching up because they're not taking like somebody who's written 5 copies. They're taking the bestseller list. But it felt like this intellectual snobbery. And then I thought back to myself and thought, this is why people don't like you, or why people often, because people think that because I take a counter narrative, I actually wrote about this in my current newsletter, because the things I speak about tend to be somewhat counter narrative. Generally, it's not because I'm always contrarian. It's because I don't feel the need to share the opinions on the thousands of things that I've read that I agree with. Like if you write a book and I read it and I agree with it, I'm going to say, oh, I agree with that. It's amazing. Then I'm not going to write a blog post repeating what you said because, they could read your book. I may share your book, but so because my approach is counter narrative, and I did think like, wow, look at the trolls, look at people we're talking about online. Negativity is not a nice overarching state, is my point. And I was curious to what you guys thought about that. Is negativity unattractive?
So I want to say the following, is that I find myself, like my wife always asks, how are you? And I always talk about the fact that I'm a pessimist, realist, semi-depressive kind of dude, right? Like I'm quite a serious guy generally. I live under that state of like joy. And I do it all the time, and I put on a facade, and with my clients, I'm engaging, and I try to be funny where I can, whatever that is. But overall, I think I'm quite a negative person. I genuinely believe that. And I went to a 50th, one of my first 50ths, literally within my friend group 2 weeks ago. And I ran into someone that I haven't seen for 25 years who was at school with me. And I'm negative about Johannesburg. I'm negative about the country, the state of the country, politics, the rand dollar. I'm negative about a lot of things, right? In general, load shedding. I'm sitting in the dark here, basically, right? I'm negative about a lot of things. However, I met someone who I haven't seen for 25 years, who I hardly knew, who just went on the biggest negative rampage I've ever heard. And I walked away going, fuck, I hope I don't sound like that. Like I hope no one sees me like that, because that is horrific. Okay. And he wasn't being negative, like excessively. Like the stuff he was talking about was actually quite realistic. He was talking about real things that are mostly based in reality, but there was no positivity in the conversation. So in terms of a negative trait, it made me, Mr. Negative here, quite drained. And I definitely walked away going, God, I hope I'm not feeling like that by anyone. Okay. So it's the first time in a long time where it slapped me in my face. It's a mirror where I was like, I say a lot of the same things this guy says. Oh my God, I hope I don't sound like that. And I've been a lot more back to intentional around going, if stuff is shit, keep it to yourself. You know, unless it's part of a meaningful conversation, there's no point starting with the place is burning. You know what I mean? Like there's no point in it. So I've realized that, again, do what you can do, control your own environment, take agency of your life where possible. And the rest of the stuff, I'm not saying bottle up, but know when to moan and when not to. And especially with people you don't know, who don't know who you are and have no context, I think being negative is very dangerous. Just one thing. Do either of you, maybe this is an age thing, do either of you ever remember there was a show on TV called Mystery Science Theater 3000?
No.
Yes,
No.
but I don't remember the show.
Okay. It was basically they had 2 or 3 little puppets sitting in front of a big silver screen, and they would show classic shows, and these 3 puppets would just take pot shots at the shows. Now, very similar to the what's it called, if books could kill, is that the first episode or the first 20 minutes is actually really funny. But then you realize that someone has poured their life into producing this film, whether it's a piece of shit film or not, it's immaterial, right? Someone thought it was creative. Someone put a lot of effort and time in doing this thing. There was a big team effort. It cost money. Someone had belief in this thing. And then we just take a shit on it. And the reality is that in order to be successful, especially in the creative field, you've actually got to put yourself out there and produce a few shit books to get a good one. Produce a few shit podcasts to get a good one, right? And if you're scared that someone's going to shit on you, because they are, you're never going to produce good work. So I'm going back to this thing, is that it took me a while to realize that just the ease and the entertainment of dumping on someone's stuff, when Rich was talking about it, I'm like, you realize that even if you don't like any of those books, and actually I like all of those books, I think most of them are really good, and they have really good stuff in there, is understand how much pain and suffering and time and effort and energy went into writing those books, and how easy it is to tear it apart. And I think that people don't realize, I mean, am I right in saying we've all written a book, Matt, you're in the process of writing another one, Richard's written lots, it's heartbreaking and energy draining to produce a book, whether it's good or bad. I mean, I wrote a really shitty textbook, and people can hate it, but don't tear it apart for shits and giggles, because you're dumping on my spirit to some degree. Matt?
Yeah. So there's 2 things here. One angle for this for me is context. So what's the context of a podcast versus the context of someone critiquing the same book on a blog post on Medium, right? And then who are the actors in the story, right? So there's these guys who no one knows about, podcast hosts, but what if it was Dave Chappelle doing a comedy sketch on habits, right? And so he's dumping on the same idea of habits, right? Atomic Habits by James Clear. But we give permission to different actors to say, like, so Rich has gone, no, actually, I don't give you permission, or maybe you give you permission, but I don't agree with it. But then if you change the context and you take the actor from a no-name podcast host to Dave Chappelle, does Dave Chappelle have the right to dump because he's a comedian, and therefore we find it funny? Do you see what I mean? So I guess it's
so
I'm not judging on rights.
Is really important. Context is really important for me there. Yeah? Sorry, Rich.
Well, I'm just saying that I'm not judging on their right to do it. Like, everyone's got I watch Tom Bassel, board game reviewer, and sometimes he'll do really, really great reviews, and sometimes if work is really shit, he'll do a really, really shit review. I'm simply saying that, and I think that should always be in play. Like, people should be allowed to say, hey, this isn't nice. My observation was less about them being allowed to do the podcast. You know what you're getting. If you buy into that podcast, you're getting people shitting on books. And let's be honest, these are books that are often giving, telling you how to live your life, that they're saying are badly, their argument is that these things are badly researched. My observation was not on that as such. It was simply on the realization that, wow, just how quickly they became unattractive to me as people, because the pursued negativity was unattractive. So it was a lot less about, should they be allowed to? Of course they should be allowed to. It was about more reflection on myself. Like, I never realized how unattractive being negative over and over is. And it's like, look at Matt, right? Matt left South Africa. Matt lives in America. I've never heard Matt say a shit thing about South Africa. Now, there's no doubt if you leave South Africa, there's certainly, you've weighed up the bad of one place, and we all know South Africa has bad things, and the good of something else. But every time we have a conversation with Matt about, the US, it's about the positive aspects of the place he has gone, not about the negative aspects of the place he has lost. And because he also respects that we're still here, and I'm sure, he absolutely has negative things. Of course he does. He lives here his whole life. But again, nobody wants to hear somebody who's left South Africa, be sanctimonious about that thing.
And in the same vein, I shared that stupid article around all those motorbikes stolen off a vehicle in Denver where Matt lives. And knowing in principle that Denver's probably a better place from a safety and security place than South Africa, I'm allowed to
that's what made it funny.
And go, like, bro, you got to get out of Denver. They're stolen a bike. Like, it's super dangerous. Like, what are you doing there? Okay, that makes it funny. And that's the comedy piece when Matt's talking about, if a comedian was taking the piss out of a book, it's not because he's trying to be entertaining consistently around being negative around these things. It's because he'll find the humor in some of the things that James Clear talked about, and it will be counter thinking versus we are here to tear holes away at someone's work. It's a different context. That's what I was trying to get to, right? And actually I think it would be hysterical if a comedian got up and went, I'm going to review 5 books. I mean, did you guys ever see what's the English comedian that I love so much? Old white dude, never married, girlfriend, cat.
Jimmy Carr?
The Office. What's his name?
Oh, Ricky Gervais. Gervais. Is it Gervais or Gervais? I'm actually not sure. Is it like French? Gervais.
French.
I don't know what he says.
But did you ever see him review Noah's Ark, or when he did all the Bible? He brings up the kiddies books.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That is absolutely amazing, right? Like, that was it's one of my favorite stand-ups of all time, where he takes the piss out of Bible books from a kid's age. Anyway, segue completely bizarre. Anyway, so I agree with you. I think negativity is a shitty thing if it's always on. I think if that's the point of the podcast, I don't want to listen to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's change the context to sport, right? So, New Zealand got mauled by South Africa in rugby, right, 2 weeks ago. So if you listen to the New Zealand media, like, they were all negative, right? Like, 10 days before the World Cup or 2 weeks, blah, blah, poor performance, So is that permissible? Like, is it in that context, is it necessary? If you're a passionate supporter for a franchise like the Denver Broncos, who are absolutely fucking toilets at the moment, right? Like, they're just a poor team. And if I'm in the taxi guy go, yeah, we're Denver Broncos. Like, we went to Ed Sheeran concert, and the taxi guy was like mauling all over the Denver Broncos. Like, they're so negative. Like, they can't even fill half the stadium. Meanwhile, Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift, they sell out the full stadium, 100,000 people, 2 nights back to back, week after week. You know what I mean? So in that context, is it attractive? Is that the question? Or is it necessary? Or is it just a fact? The Denver Broncos are a poor team.
I think it's a fact. I think criticism is definitely okay, right? I mean, if we want to be, you can be critical about many things, and if you buy into a sports team is your national team, and they're not playing well, why would anybody go out there and say that they're playing well? Like, a week before the World Cup, you probably shouldn't get that level of a thrashing from the team that you're supposed to meet in the final, right? That is definitely something to worry about, and I think that's completely in play. And again, if you had somebody that took the other side in that particular game and just turned around and said, you know what, South Africa, yes, they won, but, blah, 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 the arrogance they showed on the field and blah, 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 and shat all over them over and over and over again, you'd be like, bro, why are you never happy? Like, and you all know those people, right? They'll do everything, and then they're just like, why can you not just see the good in the world? And do you guys know Bronwyn Williams?
Yes.
I know she is.
So Bronwyn is amazing. She's like a futurist. She's really smart. She's very, very cool. Like, follow her on LinkedIn if you don't. She does these daily signal videos and things. Yeah, and she speaks quite a bit about having a bias for optimism. And I think that she may have got it from Kevin Kelly, because I've heard him talk about similar things. But she goes quite deep on it. And her hypothesis is that basically nothing good comes out of being negative. And I think it's very important to state that you can be simultaneously challenge ideas and be positive. So the video of mine that goes out tomorrow is on challenging the idea of personal purpose for positive reasons, because I think that it's actually making it harder for people to be happy. My judge intent, is to be very positive, but I am doing that by challenging something that I think that we need to think about. And so her argument is, I've extrapolated on this, that, you search the world and there's nothing of significance has ever happened in the world by a pessimist. Like, no pessimist has ever achieved anything worthwhile. Thoughts on that?
Well, let's take load shedding. Okay. So for my US audience, or wherever you guys are, if you're not in South Africa, so load shedding is a term. In fact, Richard or Brent, you fucking explain it, because I don't care anymore.
No, you go for it. You left.
It's a euphemism. It's a euphemism for we've cocked up the power utility in this country, and there's not enough power to keep the lights on. We're going to load shed the power load.
Yeah, we're going to teach you South African now, how to speak South African. Load shedding comes from the South Africanese word meaning shit government.
Yeah, corrupt government.
Sorry, my bad.
So should you be negative about load shedding? I think you absolutely should be negative, because there's zero hope. like that systemic issue is so major, and as a citizen, you're not empowered to fix it. You're not, and you're trusting the government and the rest of its cronies to basically come up with solutions. So privatize the energy sector as fast as possible. Give us at least some hope, because if Medupi power station is never going to be online, and Eskom, the power utility company, is just wrought with fraud, and the mafia's in there and all that kind of shit, like, as a citizen, how the fuck are you supposed to fix that? So if I think about that, and also it really impacts you. I mean, like, we spoke about this, I think, in the first episode. Like, if I had like 55 people in my business, and then the power goes off, the phones don't work. There's no internet. You cannot communicate. You cannot sell. You cannot deliver. You cannot operate. And so as a business owner, that really fucks you up, right? So in that case, I think you're right. I'm negative about it, because there's zero
completely.
Yeah.
Completely. But this morning, interesting enough, Shoprite Checkers, which is one of the largest retailers in fact in the world, weirdly enough, I didn't realize that number of stores they have, put out their results. And they've done incredibly well in spite of the 1.2 billion rand spent on diesel in the financial year to keep their generators running, to keep the lights on, the fridges going. Now, in contrast, the other retailers, the Pick n Pays and the Spars and those guys, have gone down because they were kind of going, the government will fix it. We're not going to invest. Where someone went, we're going to be smart. We're going to put down solar and we're going to put down generators and we're going to solve this problem. And it's actually been a blessing for them, really enough, because if the one retail is dark, you're not walking in there. You're walking if the guy's got his lights on. And the second thing is that, as negative as I am about the load shedding, because it drives me bloody mad, is I think that the individuals and the municipalities and privatization of solar farms and wind farms and all kinds of other smart things, in the next couple of years, we're not going to rely on the government. Unfortunately, that has a different impact, right? But I think that what you do is you get now hope and positivity in going, I see these large organizations taking the proverbial bull by the horns and going, you're going to sort it. And I trust institutions, private institutions, way more than any government, because they are for profit. They're going to provide a service. There's going to be some kind of support. And if you phone someone, hopefully they will answer. So I think that the weird thing is that the dynamics are changing in this country. And I do see positivity long-term in the power issue. Short-term, we've taken huge pain. There's no question about it. But the question that you asked was, what negative thing has created a positive outcome? Was that the question posed? And nothing comes to mind. I mean, like outside of this, maybe a bad example of load shedding, right? But I agree. I think positivity generally drives innovation, people, delivery.
You know, when we're talking about load shedding and stuff, and I guess positivity. So again, by all means, anything that's negative, we can be critical of things. I'm not saying don't be critical. I'm saying if you're critical all the time, that people aren't going to like you. And I guess the kick side of that is actually positivity is attractive. Not if you're absolutely positive all the time, nobody will respect you. But if your ratio of positivity to negativity is 9 to 1, you're going to be way more liked than somebody who's 9 to 1 the other way. Right. And so a good example of that is the other Brent. And in fact, I want to bring up a thing about First Name Famous in a second. But the other Brent in South Africa is a guy called Brent Lindeque, a really good friend of mine. Do you guys know him?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So Brent Lindeque, he's got a brand called The Good Things Guy. And Brent is amazing because he is mostly positive. In fact, his brand is positive, but he is mostly positive. And then every now and then, when he posts something negative, challenging the country around something, people take to it in a very different way. He gets way more response because when you break a positive person down to say something negative, all of a sudden I'm like, well, holy shit, let me read this now. Because this is a guy who has a complete bias for positivity, a bias for optimism. And now he's saying, well, hold on a second, this is too much. Let's challenge this. And you look at the engagement he gets, and it's really quite incredible. And so I think that, if you want to change things, having a bias for positivity more often than negativity. And again, this whole thing kind of went back to the idea that if you are always negative all the time, it's kind of just it's not very attractive. I'm not saying you shouldn't be allowed to. They're making probably a comedic, again, you should listen. I'd love you if you get a chance to listen to an episode of the show. And maybe we revisit it. Like it's a well put together show with good data, good information. I can see why Nick loves it, and I was loving the first 10 minutes. I just did by the end of it, I was like, I'm a bit tired of this. Like, fuck, it wore me out. And that's the other thing is negativity is draining. Yeah. Like even about something you don't care about. I wasn't a massive fan of Atomic Habits. I liked it well enough, but by the end of it, I was quite drained by their shitting on it. Can I context shift, or do you guys want to say more on this?
Let's change
just one second. So we all get a ton of newsletters all day long, and we subscribe and unsubscribe. But there's a newsletter that I can highly recommend called Future Crunch. Future Crunch is it's a weekly or bi-weekly. It's probably 50 pieces, each with a link out, and it's only good news, and it's categorized into eco, green, business, medical and health, but it's literally, it's the world's good news wrapped into a newsletter. And I find that I just read the headlines, occasionally they'll click out, obviously, but what you find is that you read and you're going, there's actually so much goodness that we just don't hear because media is shit in the world, right? There's so much good things happening we just do not hear. And here's a newsletter that's scraping all this information and sharing the good news with you. And I find that in and amongst all the newsletters I get, which I read whenever I do, this one is always the shining light. It's always like, it's quite nice just to read good stats, good stuff. Something often got nothing to do with me whatsoever. It's like, good rains in Bangladesh give great soya harvest. People are making money. Yay. Nothing to do with me. However, it's good to hear that there is positivity in the world. So putting out listeners, Future Crunch, wonderful newsletter.
Another
Context
wonderful
shift.
newsletter, msng.wtf/newsletter. It's mine. Good Things Guy newsletter on Friday. Good Things Guy newsletter on Friday is also incredible for that. And let me just one last counterpoint before I go to names. There's another contrarian South African who I really like. Like I really, really enjoy as a person. I've been on his show a few times. His name is Roman Kavanagh, and he has a relatively controversial news show called Morning Shot. And basically, he does a news thing in the morning that is your morning shot of news. And we started listening to him during COVID and listening to his show. And here's the weird thing. I actually don't often disagree with his takes. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever disagreed with one of his takes. But Jazz and I had to stop listening to it. So after we would put it on in the morning, it's called The Morning Shot. It goes live at 7 a.m. every morning. And I would start my day with that. And I actually had to stop listening to it because he basically starts every day with a little morning shot of negativity, something negative about South Africa, the government, the country, the thing like this. Even if I disagree, this is a really horrible way. Like the worst way to start your day is with a newspaper. If you start your day looking at news headlines, in fact, if you ever look at the news, stop. Like it's not easy. Anyway, names. Guys, I've got a thought on fame and about the people who win are the people who first name famous. Right? So if I turn around and talk to you about Seth, there's a relative and listen, hold on a second. This might take 5 or 10 minutes. So if you want to, I can put a pin in this one and we can do this another time.
Yeah, I think we're going to need a pin this one, brother. I've got another show in a few minutes.
Okay, so we're going to chat about the first name fame.
Someone that I know gave up the opportunity to get Richard at Gmail. Someone I know. And went for capitalist punk at Gmail.
Actually, that fiery arm guy at Gmail. Yeah, luckily it no longer exists, so nobody can mail me on either of them. But we'll chat about that next time because so let's put a pin in first name fame and mentions per minute as a kickoff concept for next time. Yeah. Also, when we talk about names, we can talk about the name of the show, which could be fun as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, another episode with no business talk.
Amazing.
Oh gosh, what are we doing? Ever. This is not what I'm expected or what I expected at all. Anyway, it was a good chat.
Next time, I promise we're going to do business. Okay, because we're going to start off by talking about branding. So that is the opening conversation is branding. So we're definitely getting into branding.
Okay, great. We've got to bring it back into keep it here.
Yeah, exactly. It's for serious folk here.
All right, guys.
Always a pleasure, guys.
Always a pleasure. Everybody else, we'll see you again soon.